Each month, Annie and I host a deeper dive, which is a live Q&A with an expert in the field of lactation, business, or personal development. We hope you enjoy.
Well, welcome everyone to our deeper dive. We're so excited to have you guys here to learn about the WHO code, the application of the WHO code, learn all the things that we need to know to just understand this really interesting um, information that's out there that I feel like we need a lawyer to break it down and tell us what we need to know. So we're really excited to have you guys all here.
Yes, we are thrilled to host Allison Porter. And let me just introduce Allison to you. Allison is an attorney and certified breastfeeding specialist who breastfed her son for 18 months and daughter until age 2. She's a Tennessee girl born and raised in Memphis, Tennessee, and went to the University of Tennessee Knoxville for her undergraduate and law school in Memphis, and currently lives in Nashville. She currently practices health law, focusing on healthcare regulatory compliance and managed care insurance denials after doing employment discrimination law for several years. Her main lactation passion is to be a resource on breastfeeding and pumping rights, laws, and advocacy. Allison, welcome.
Hi, thank you guys for having me again. So glad you actually wanted me to talk again after who knows what I said last time.
Well, we feel like we learned so much. The thing that I so appreciate is just breaking it down in a way that I can understand. It doesn't sound like that lawyer speak that I don't speak that language. Help me break this down and understand. And also making sure we have we're being very ethical about our practices, because a lot of times if you don't seek out this information, it's not going to come flying in your face and make you understand it. You got to make sure you understand it. So you are such a wonderful resource for that. And I appreciate how easy it is to understand when you explain these things to us. So we're so excited to have you back.
Thank you for that. Glad to be here.
Well, let's jump right in. We are talking today about the WHO code, and you should all have access to a handout that's created called Develop Your WHO code Policies. And it's checklists that you can use to make sure that you are complying with the WHO code and respecting intellectual property when you're creating your social media posts and everything you're putting out there into the world, bottle emoji or no bottle emoji. So Allison, can you tell us what is the ultimate or overarching goal of the WHO code?
Okay, I want to just start by saying, anybody listening today, you might feel like we're taking 10 steps back to take 2 steps forward, because I really want to talk about the basics of the WHO code. I feel like we've gotten so far into the I'm a supporter of the code versus the code is outdated wars that people have no longer even paid attention to what it actually says. So talking about the ultimate and overarching goal of the WHO code, I think if the title of it wasn't so long and we could all just actually call it what it's named, some of these arguments wouldn't even exist. So the first thing to put in your brain is that it's actually the International Code of Marketing of Breast Milk Substitutes. If we just actually used its title, I feel like all of the conversations about bottles and bottle emojis would just go away, because it doesn't even make sense if you actually just focus on the title of what it is. But since it is 12 words, we're just going to stick to the WHO code. But I want you guys to keep in your brain the entire time I'm talking that it's marketing of breast milk substitutes. Now, with that in mind, the introduction of the WHO code tells you exactly who it is and who it's about if you just read the introduction without even getting started on reading the actual code. The introduction makes it clear that it even became an idea around 1974 because the World Health Assembly noticed a general decline in breastfeeding. They noticed it all around the world, and it was related to, at that time, what they felt was sociocultural and other factors, which included the promotion of manufactured breast milk substitutes. Came up again at the 1978 assembly, and at that point, they were like, okay, there was actually a great decline in breast milk or breastfeeding initiation between the 70s and 80s, which I'll later talk about, had a lot to do with women returning to work at the time. At the 1978 assembly, they're like, okay, look, we just have to give priority to pushing this as a real health initiative. So they made it known even before it was adopted that the whole point was, let's give priority to preventing malnutrition. And I'll quote it: prevent malnutrition in infants and young children by supporting and promoting breastfeeding, take legislative and social action to facilitate breastfeeding by working mothers, and regulate inappropriate sales promotion of infant foods that can be used to replace breast milk. So if you just look at the plain introduction of the WHO Code, it has nothing to do with being anti-bottle feeding and anything else that people like to focus on today. It really was just about the massive decline that they were seeing around the world in breastfeeding initiation, and how they felt like at this point the marketing had gotten so out of control that it needed to take legislative action to rein it in and let's push this as a health initiative that people need to focus on human milk feeding. So that's the overarching goal, is to push human milk feeding.
Well, that is so interesting because I feel like we forget like the context of when it all came about. And maybe you could expand a little bit on that, because it sounds like this was all created 40 plus years ago. And is the historical context of that time important for its application today?
Absolutely. And I just want to preface what I'm about to say with saying what I'm about to say is not to say that the code is not relevant now, because it's absolutely relevant. But if you don't take it in its historical context, you will miss the entire point. So like I said, leading up to it, they were seeing this overarching decline in breastfeeding around the world. That was 40 years ago, and it's not 1981 anymore. The context that is the most important when you're talking about the WHO Code, that I feel like people kind of miss once they pick a side of, proponent or it's outdated, is that 1981, the mention of bottles and teats is all throughout the WHO Code. If you read it, though, you never see bottles and teats separate from breast milk substitutes. Breast milk substitute is always before it or after it. So it says breast milk substitutes and bottles and teats, or bottles and teats and breast milk substitutes. Furthermore, in 1981, 70% of babies were formula fed. So in 1981, if you saw a baby with a bottle, 9.9 out of 10 times, it was absolutely formula in that bottle. I think one of the most important things that people ignore too when you're trying to apply the code in now 2022, it was adopted 40 years ago. It was adopted in 1981, but the first double electric pump for home use was not created until 1991. So when the code mentions a bottle, it really couldn't have been talking about breast milk in a bottle, because nobody had a pump at home in 1981. There were pumps, but they were all intended for home use, or hospital use, and most people didn't have access to them. One of the most interesting things I found while I was researching this topic was that I talked about earlier the massive decline in breastfeeding rates they saw in that 10-year period before they adopted the code. But also what they saw in that 10-year period was a massive influx of women returning to work during their breastfeeding journeys. And one of the quotes from, I think it was Forbes that I was reading, was talking about the percentages of women that were returning to work, but they specifically attributed the decline in breastfeeding before the 1970s and around the beginning of the 70s was to the difficulty of combining breastfeeding with maternal employment. So when it was adopted in 1981, like I said, people did not have pumps at home. They were starting to have to return to work during their breastfeeding journeys. None of those things apply today. People have complete stashes of pumps in their closet, whether they're double electric, manual, whatever, there are blogs everywhere. IBCLCs are teaching hand expression and this and that. There are millions of ways, millions of bottles, millions of ways for people to feed their children, their babies, breast milk while they're at work. They just did not exist in 1981. So the mention or image of a bottle automatically bringing up that this is a WHO Code violation It's not. It's just not. It's not even culturally relevant to our time. It's not historically accurate because you're talking about a document that was adopted before people even had pumps at home. Some other interesting statistics like when I say they saw a massive decline, I mean between the 1970 and 1980, breastfeeding initiation dropped from 54% to 33.4%.
If you enjoyed that snippet, the good news is that deeper dive was recorded. And by joining our membership community, you can have access to that deeper dive as well as our entire vault of deeper dives going back through 2020. You will also be automatically invited to our live monthly deeper dives, so you can ask the experts directly all the questions you want to know about that topic. We look forward to seeing you at our next deeper dive.